This is the first of two videos that I'm making about drums in Eurorack. In them, I'm going to combine some demos of specific modules with more general patching tips and techniques. In this first one, I'll be focusing on two modules from Winter Plankton, a collaboration between Winter Modular and Plankton Electronics. I'm using Dassbrum, which is the all-new kick drum module, and Zaps, which has been around for a couple of years now. I met the guys behind these modules at Machina Bristronica last year, and they're kindly sponsoring this video, but rather than just doing straight up sound demos, I thought it would be a good opportunity to dive a bit deeper into various approaches to making beats in a modular synth context. In some ways, working with drums in Modular can be a lot more hassle than just using a drum machine, but on the other hand, I find working in Eurorack opens up some approaches that aren't so easy in conventional hardware. So in this video, I'll demonstrate how to use modulation to create more dynamic and exciting kick drum patterns. I'll look at how linear sequencing can turn a single voice into a full drum kit. I'll show you how dynamics and accents can bring simple patterns to life. I'll play with polymetric modulation and controlled randomness for complex evolving rhythms. And I'll explore using kick drum modules to create tuned bass lines. So let's get started with a look at the Dassbrum or Dassbrum. The name is obviously a spoonerism of bass drum. I can only assume they considered calling it the Dick Crumb and thought better of it. Anyway, it's 8 HP wide. It's pretty straightforward. There's a trigger input and an audio output and 4 CV inputs at the top for accent, release time, pitch and folding. There are 3 faders down the bottom which control the kind of master pitch, the release time of the amplitude envelope and the amount of folding. There are basically 4 different wave folding or wave shaping models inside, or types of wave shaping, and they can be placed pre or post the amplitude VCA. So there's basically 8 possible settings for the folding, which are stepped through with this button here, and they're kind of color coded. I'll talk through those in a second. We've got a manual trigger button, which basically just does the same thing as firing a trigger to the input. And then in the middle, we've got 2 knobs that control the pitch envelope. There's decay time and amount. There's also a sweet spot button, which I'll come onto in a minute. And this section, if you press and hold that button, allows you to control the kind of offset of the accent input to the VCA and the envelope, the pitch envelope. I'll come onto that in a minute when I go through the accent controls. Let's just get a little pattern going into it so we can start hearing the effect of the different wave shaping and wave folding models. So I'm using LX Euclid clocked from PAMS here, and I'll use various other channel outputs to modulate things in a minute. But let's just start off with this kind of 5 out of 16 pattern. And I'm in the orange wave folding mode at the moment, which is the kind of classic hard clipping mode. And if I just go up and down on this fader. I'm not using any pitch envelope at the moment, so it sounds a little bit kind of flat, perhaps. We're just hearing the kind of sine wave tone being folded. I'll come onto the envelope in a minute, which will get it sounding a bit punchier. So that's pre-VCA, and then kind of darker orange is post-VCA. And that kind of has the effect of reducing the amount of audible decay time. Green mode is a kind of surge style wave shaper. I find this actually a bit more useful when using it as a melodic voice, which you'll see in one of the later patches. That's sort of pre and post VCA. And the blue mode is a custom wave shaper, they call it in the manual. Not quite sure what that entails, but it's got a slightly more aggressive character than the others. That's pre, post, and then finally the purple is a kind of combo of the hard clipping and surge. This is definitely the most kind of aggressive sounding. Let's go into the orange post VCA and let's listen to the effect of the pitch envelope. So if I bring up a little bit of decay and then amount, effect of this. We get into this kind of classic kick drum territory by playing with the amount of this tuning, or the amount of this envelope rather, and then the tuning. You can see there's lots of scope here for more or less aggressive sounds. If I hit the sweet spot button, what this is basically doing is limiting the range of these controls. Without sweet spot on, we can get into these really huge ranges. What sweet spot does is keep things more in a kind of lower kick drumish range. Still gets quite high, but it's more suited to kind of low end percussion sounds in this sweet spot range. Let's just go through the other wave shaping types with this. Now we've got a bit of pitch envelope on. Get quite zappy, obviously. So you get the idea, there's a pretty wide range of tones available from subtle to extreme. Let's get some modulation happening. So if I get a slightly busier pattern coming in, let's just up this to 13 steps, and let's hit a much more sparse accent pattern to the accent input. And if I press and hold this button, we get into the kind of accent settings. And this basically allows you to set the headroom between the accented and the unaccented steps. It doesn't make the accent steps louder, it makes the non-accented steps quieter. So you can hear the steps in between those kind of four, well only three with this pattern that you're hearing, are much quieter. And we can do the same thing with the amount of pitch envelope. So the accented steps get more of that pitch, which makes them slightly zappier. Let's get another pattern going. And let's modulate the pitch. I'm just going to take it through quadrat to attenuate it slightly. So I've got these three steps here. I just need a little bit of modulation, so I'm attenuating this gate voltage right the way down. Let's do something similar with the fourth channel of Alex Euclid. So I've got another reasonably sparse pattern, and let's go into the release time, say. This extra modulation, but really lively and interesting kind of kick pattern. Taking that pitch envelope off. Let's try one of the slightly more subtle. So there you go, quick tour of Dassbrum and a little bit of the effect of modulating some of these parameters with a busy pattern. We can get some really interesting kind of tonal, percussive, dynamic kind of patterns going. So next, let's have a look at Zaps, which is like Dassbrum's older cousin. It's been around for a couple of years now, and there's already a lot of great content out there about it, so I'm not going to give you a really exhaustive blow-by-blow account of exactly how it works, but I will talk about its kind of top-level principles, because it's a really interesting approach to drums in Modular, which lends itself to a really different kind of sequencing approach. So although it's a really big, chunky module, 24 HP, there's one trigger input and one audio output. It essentially only ever plays one sound at a time. But its whole idea is that you can very easily switch the sound that's playing on every trigger that it gets. The way it's structured is you have projects which each have 12 banks of sounds, and each bank has 12 individual slots which each contain a particular configuration of the settings for the internal sound generator. And using the CV input, you can change which of those slots plays every time it gets a trigger. You can sequence it via CV that way. So it's kind of linear sequencing, or parameter locking, I guess, is the kind of parlance you might have heard to describe that kind of approach. It's super powerful, and it's really good fun to kind of just feed triggers into it, feed a CV sequence into that slot CV input, and you just get these really cool patterns coming out of it. Even though you're only playing one sound at a time, it just lends itself to a particular kind of groove. So the sound engine itself is this twin oscillator design, two analog oscillators where you can cross-modulate them with AM and FM, and they each have their own envelopes for amplitude and pitch, and you store a particular set of those settings in each of these slots. So we choose a bank, say bank 1, and we have these 12 sounds which you can trigger with these buttons. And you'll notice some sounds have a certain amount of randomness built in, so that every time I trigger it, it's slightly different. So that adds another layer of possibilities. You can set random changes to occur to some or all of the parameters every time it gets a trigger. So it's super powerful. Let's get a little sequence going. I'm going to get the varigate 4 here. I'm just going to send an 8-step CV sequence in. I'm going to use Alex Euclid from A to V Project here to sequence the drums. I'm going to sequence a kick from Dassbrum, a single trigger pattern going into Zaps, and I've got a couple of hi-hats which I'll keep muted at the moment on Archer's rig from Shackmat hi-hat module over here. For now, let's just listen to Zaps on its own, and if I get this 8-step sequence going, I've set all the notes to 0 volts at the moment, or all the steps to 0. So we're just going to hear, let's go into bank 2, say, and get that started. So we're getting a trigger on every semiquaver. And if I start to move these sliders, each of these is setting a different slot. You'll see these lights come up on the steps when these slots are triggered. So you can basically just drag these sliders around to get a nice random pattern like this. And then one thing I'm going to do is just reduce the number of triggers slightly going into Zaps. So I'm going to go for a sort of 10/14 Euclidean pattern. So we're going to get a slightly different kind of polymetric triggering of those sounds. But then let's bring in the kick drum to underpin that. So lots of fun. Let's try a different bank. Let's try bank 4. Let's keep that one running for a minute. In fact, let's run it through the music thing mini drive for a bit of overload. Just drive that slightly and bring in a hi-hat. Sliders again to vary the groove. So all we've got here is a kick drum, a couple of conventional hi-hats. Everything else is coming out of Zaps, and it's only playing one sound at a time. Let's try another bank. some of these banks and slots, like I said, have randomization built in as well. So yeah, loads of fun. And another great feature on Zaps is you could just pick a bank and randomize everything in it. If I go to the function extra here, randomize bank, let's get a full new set of sounds. And it's kind of pretty hard to make it sound bad. Everything you do has something interesting in it. So next I just want to explore how even a really limited palette of drum sounds can be made a lot more interesting by using accent and decay time modulation. I've got Dassbrum and Zaps here sequenced from the BeatStep Pro, and let's start with the kick drum. So I've got a fairly busy kind of electro kick pattern here. And there's quite a lot going on. All those steps have kind of equal weight, but let's take an accent pattern. And we're really hitting these three key parts of the beat, with the steps in between feeling a lot more secondary now. Let's switch over to hi-hats. So I've got the melodic sequencer in the BeatStep Pro here going into Zaps. I'm using the gate to trigger it, and I'm using the note pitch to switch between the two different slots, which have got these closed and open hi-hat sounds in them. And they're pretty uniform, obviously, in terms of level and time. But let's get a accent pattern. And again, I've got the drum lane producing an accent pattern here. If I go into the accent input, gives us a little bit of more dynamic variation in the sound. And if I go back into the sequencer lane, I can use the velocity output, which gives me a sort of value I can set on each step. Let's control the release time with that. I've set a few different velocities on these steps. And those two simple hi-hat sounds are now dancing in a much more interesting way together. Let's hit a snare, which I've got set to these steps. And I'll just show you the effect of that velocity. So if I increase that on step 13, that means that second snare rings out a bit longer. And let's bring the kick back in. And so this beat that only has 4 drum sounds in it sounds a lot more dynamic and interesting just by varying the levels and decay times of some of the sounds within the beat. So next I want to dive back into Zaps again, and I want to use some short CV sequences to modulate parameters on Zaps. And I'm going to make those CV sequences polymetric, so different lengths, which means the resulting patterns will be slightly more complex and evolving than just a straight kind of 8-step pattern. To get us started, I'm going to use the Varigate 4 to send CV sequences to Zaps. I'm going to trigger it on 16th notes. I'm going to use the first channel to control the slot selection, and I'll use another channel to control the release time. Let's just get the triggers started. And if I just hit these sliders, just setting a different slot with each of these 8 notes. Just kind of similar to what we heard earlier. Let me just bring in a kick drum as well from Dassbrum. And I'm going to use an envelope from Pam's inverted to sidechain zaps just subtly against that kick, so the kick will sort of punch through, it'll duck the volume of zaps on those kick drum hits. So this is just a kind of 2-beat pattern, 8 semiquaver steps basically. Let's just go into track 2, and that's modulating the release time. So again, if I zero all these, and if I just extend a couple of these, so again, just an 8-step pattern. Where things get interesting is if I adjust the length of these patterns. So let's go to the first track again and just change the length from 8 steps to 7. If I go to the second channel and set the length to 6, say. So now I've got a 7-step pattern changing the notes and a 6-step pattern modulating the release time. And now we have a pattern that doesn't repeat itself quite so regularly over the course of a bar. I've got another channel which I can use to modulate the decay or the release time of the kick drum as well. Let's go to channel 3. And again, I'm just going to zero these sliders. Let's go into release. Emphasize that every second kick. So much fun just randomly whacking these sliders and we get these really, really cool patterns out. And now just for the final touch, I'm going to use the joystick over here on the left of the case. I'm going to go into the randomness CV input and the volt per octave CV input. And now I can use the joystick to randomize the sounds and bring the pitch up. So a couple of polymetric CV patterns, a bit of joystick controlled randomness. And these two modules are producing this incredibly rich and complex kind of rhythm pattern. Okay, to finish, I just want to have a little look at using Dassbrum as a bassline voice rather than a kick drum using the volt per octave pitch input. Here's a little pitch sequence from Pam's Pro. And I've kind of got the pitch envelope very, very short with just a little smidge of amount there just to give it a tiny bit of a transient. But otherwise it's just this kind of instant attack decay envelope which I can play with this, or release envelope with this release slider here. And I'm using the green surge wavefolder mode post VCA. And that folding gives us quite a nice kind of range of bassline kind of tones. I've got some stepped random from Pam's too. Let's modulate the fold amount. Just to get a bit of dynamic accenting on that. And to accompany this, I've put together a little really simple beat with zaps using one of the melodic channels in the BeatStep Pro. So this is just one of the sequencer channels, and I've got it set to the chromatic mode on the slot select input. just kind of hitting a bunch of different sounds in one of these banks. And just to round it off, I've got some hi-hats from the drum channel in the BeatStep Pro playing Archer's rig. I'm running Zaps through the Music Thing mini drive again. And Dassbrum really does work all the way up into these kind of high-pitched melodic ranges if I flip the octaves. So I'll leave it there for now. Hopefully this video has sparked a few ideas for how to use drums in your own patches and given you a bit of a flavour of what Dassbrum and Zaps can do. If you've enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel and look out for another video on this subject soon featuring some other modules. In the meantime, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.